You were looking at the USS John Finn, DDG-113, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer conducting the first confirmed U.S. Taiwan Strait transit of 2026. And right next to it, USNS Mary Sears, Aegis 65, a Pathfinder-class survey ship that doesn't show up to make a statement. It shows up to measure the battlefield. This transit ran January 16 to 17. And China's Eastern Theater Command says it monitored and tracked the ships the entire way. And the U.S. response? Routine transit, international waters, freedom of navigation. But the loadout tells the real story. Start with the muscle. John Finn is the deterrence piece. Aegis combat system, spy radar family, and the part that matters most? A 96-cell Mk-41 vertical launch system. A vertical magazine that can be loaded with standard missiles and tomahawks depending on the mission package. So when a Burke goes through the strait, the message isn't, hello. The message is, we arrived preloaded. Now the quiet kid taking notes. Mary Sears is the intelligence piece. Hydrographic and ocean survey. That means mapping sensors, multi-beam echo sounders, side-scan sonar, the kind of tools you use when you're turning an ocean floor into targeting-grade data. So together, this is the formation. Surface pressure plus undersea measurement. Deterrence on top, information underneath. And China reacted like it understood exactly what the notes are for. January 17th, 2026. Around dawn. Taiwan says a Chinese reconnaissance drone approaches Pratas, Dongsha, Taiwan-controlled territory, and flies in its airspace for 8 minutes before leaving after warnings. And here's the detail that makes it worse. Taiwan says the drone was outside the range of anti-aircraft weapons. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. Around the same period, Taiwan reported 26 PLA aircraft and 7 crossing the median line into Taiwan's Aegis sectors. Now here's where your story gets more dangerous. While John Finn and Mary Sears are the visible move in the strait, the U.S. is running the part of naval warfare that decides whether presence is real or just PR. Sustainment. January 16. A U.S. CMV-22B Osprey launches out of Japan, routes through Okinawa and the Philippines, and then lands on the flight deck of USS Abraham Lincoln. At first glance, that looks like nothing, just a tilt rotor dropping off people and parts. But that's exactly the point. Because the CMV-22 is the Navy's new carrier onboard delivery workhorse, gradually replacing the C-2, and that means the carrier strike group can stay sharp without breaking its rhythm. Now connect the dots. You've got a carrier group being kept topped off and ready, and within hours you've got John Finn and Mary Sears pushing the Taiwan Strait. Deterrence plus seabed measurement. That's not 3 separate stories. That's one posture. A cross-regional chain presence stretching from Japan across the Philippine Sea, down into the South China Sea and up into the Taiwan Strait. And the carrier is the anchor, because USS Abraham Lincoln isn't just a floating runway. It's a mobile control node. Its air wing can hold airspace, surge fighters, and respond quickly if monitoring turns into intercept. Think FA-18s and F-35Cs, air superiority, strike, and rapid reaction. That's what turns a destroyer transit from routine into covered. And that's the part China isn't fully built for yet. China can produce hulls, but this kind of multi-layer, multi-theater chain presence, air plus sea plus sustainment in the same operational window, creates a deterrence network across the first island chain that forces China to solve too many nodes at once. If the U.S. is building a chain, what does China lean on as its answer? Fujian, China's third carrier, launched in 2022, the plan's Pride project, and the sales pitch is simple. EMALs, electromagnetic catapults. Liaoning and Shandong use ski jumps. That's a weight limit disguised as a runway. If you want to take off from a ramp, you launch lighter. Less fuel, less weapons, less range. Fujian was built to break that ceiling. Catapults mean heavier launches. More fuel, more options. But on December 17, 2025, Taiwan spots Fujian transiting the Taiwan Strait for the first time since entering service, and the imagery is weirdly quiet. No aircraft on deck, no obvious flight ops, bare minimum carrier life. Then reports suggest it was heading back to Shanghai for repairs, meaning Fujian wasn't generating air power at tempo. And that matters because in January 2026, while the U.S. is moving a destroyer plus survey ship through the strait, China's carrier answer is still maturing into something operationally consistent. So when you hear Fujian closes the gap, The question isn't, does it have catapults? The real question is, can it run the deck like a factory, every day, under pressure? Now compare the logic, not the propaganda. A U.S. Nimitz class is nuclear-powered. That changes endurance, sustained operations, and where you can park a carrier without constantly managing a refueling leash. Fujian is conventionally powered. It lives on logistics. Tankers, fuel plans, and a shorter practical operating radius if the fight stretches. Then there's the speed. A U.S. carrier throws planes into the air like a pitching machine. A Nimitz is a factory. The Ford class is even faster. The Fujian? It moves at half speed. Analysts estimate it's operating at about 60% of a Nimitz class capability. Why? Bad feng shui. Translation? Deck geometry and sequencing bottlenecks that throttle launch and recovery tempo. Carriers aren't measured by size. They're measured by output. A Nimitz class average is 120 sorties per day. A Ford class is 160 sorties per day and up to 240 in emergencies. That's what sustained tempo looks like when it's real. Now look at the deck layout. Fujian's catapult layout creates a potential constraint. You can't always launch and recover aircraft at high tempo without careful sequencing. Why does that matter? Because in a real crisis, the flight deck is a production line. If you have to pause cycles to clear the deck for recovery, your sortie rate drops. Your air cover thins. Your timing windows shrink. That overlap creates collision/traffic risk. More crossing paths, more congestion, so the mitigation is ugly but simple. Slow the deck down. Fujian lives on flight deck rhythm. John Finn lives on a targeting picture, VLS, sensors, and command and control. So in the same amount of time it takes a carrier to cycle aircraft, a destroyer can do something carriers can't do. Front load decisive mass. And that's why the straight pairing matters. Pressure up top, data underneath, backed by carrier air cover. That's a formation. And Beijing's response wasn't to send Fujian screaming into the strait. It was a drone test at Pratas, an attempt to press an exposed point while the U.S. was operating in layers. That's not random. That's China searching for a simpler problem. People hear older destroyer design lineage and picture a museum. Reality? Modern Burks are upgraded around the two things that break China's kill chain: sensing and electronic warfare. And that matters because China's carrier strategy depends on one big requirement. Find the U.S. force first. Keep tracking it, then guide weapons to it. If the track collapses, the whole plan collapses. And that brings us to the part that sounds boring until it ruins your day. SEWIP, Surface Electronic Warfare Improvement Program. Translation? Modernized surface EW that helps detect emitters, classify threats, and jam or disrupt the stuff trying to build a firing solution on you. And the effect isn't noise. The effect is China's sensors don't get a clean picture when you decide they don't deserve one. Which means that in a scenario where China is trying to use aircraft, drones, and ships to build a lethal chain, a Burk can help turn that chain into broken links. Now let's say the jamming doesn't fully solve it. Let's say China gets a track long enough to believe it can act. This is where the escort stops being a bodyguard and becomes a hunter. Because U.S. surface doctrine isn't sit next to the carrier and pray. It's spread the force, complicate targeting, and be able to strike with missiles while the other side is still trying to complete the chain. Meet the SM-6. On paper, it's an anti-air missile. In real life, the Navy gave it a software glow-up, and suddenly it's not just swatting aircraft. It's a ship hunter. Fast. Long reach, over 240 miles. Once it's in the fight, it can hunt. Now run the clock. January 2026. Tension spikes. Sea state looks angry. Everything is gray. And Fujian does what carriers have to do. It turns into the wind. That's when the human choreography begins. Deck crew moving aircraft like puzzle pieces. Tow bars, hand signals, clear this lane, move that jet, hold. Because with deck constraints, you don't just launch. You sequence. And that costs time. You're looking at minutes to get a full group airborne, because you're literally moving one aircraft to make room for another. It's a traffic jam, on a flight deck, at sea, during a crisis. Now look at the other clock. On a U.S. destroyer, the tempo is completely different. There are no tow bars, no deck cycles, no guys in colored shirts sprinting around like it's a NASCAR pit lane. It's a vertical launch system, a sealed magazine. You don't get ready to launch. You decide to launch. And in that same window, while Fujian is still building an air package, a single destroyer can throw a ridiculous amount of steel into the sky. That speed difference is the story. One side is doing choreography, the other side is doing math, and US destroyers aren't waiting for a dogfight. They're not shooting the arrow, they're shooting the archer, because the arrow is the incoming jet. Scary, loud, dramatic, but the archer is the force that makes the jet matter, the ships that provide the sensors, the air defense, the picture. So the target isn't Fujian first, the target is Fujian's bodyguards, Type 055s and 052Ds. Those escorts are the ones carrying the big radars, the defense missiles, the tracking picture. Strip the escorts and the carrier isn't a monster anymore. It's a 90,000-ton deck with a shrinking bubble, no eyes, no shield, and a lot of national pride floating in open water. And yes, Type 055 is a beast. Huge, clean lines, looks incredible in a parade. But the fight isn't one ship versus one ship. It's how many launchers you have in the air at the start, and how many you can keep feeding into the fight after the first exchange. That's why the US advantage isn't just quality, it's depth. And here's what defeat before the first shot actually means. You create a situation where China can't complete the kill chain cleanly. Dirty the track with Sea-Whip so the picture degrades. Hold range with SM-6 so you're striking before their aviation closes. And while they're still trying to confirm you, you're already forcing them to defend. Fujian is built to look terrifying in a headline, and Arleigh Burke is built to work in chaos. Now, back to January 17. The drone at Pratis completes its pass. It logs reactions, tests procedures, leaves. And in the Strait, USS John Finn holds course. USNS Mary Sears keeps scanning the bottom. No shots fired, but the data was collected, and the procedures were measured in real time. That's the real message. China can build ships fast, but the US Navy is tempo, experience, and the ability to run layered operations across the first island chain without tripping over your own logistics. So if Fujian ever decides to take a shot, it won't be a duel. A duel implies both sides get a clean turn. This would be the other kind of fight. The kind where the lights go out before you find the switch. Bye for now.